All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar, where we are going to highlight the significance of planning ahead for aging individuals. You might be tuning in for yourself, or you might be in the midst of making these decisions for your either a parent or a partner. We trust that no matter what position, you'll get something useful out of today's webinar. My name is Chelsea Chartrand, and with me is Derek Duca. We are financial planners at the Duca Wealth Planning Group of Assante Financial Management. Now, before we get started today on our Eldercare Planning 101 webinar, there are a few items to keep in mind. So you will notice that you are muted currently and your cameras are off. Please keep those off as we are recording the presentation. So as I mentioned, we are going to be recording it, and if you have to step out early, we'll be posting it on our website and YouTube page, and also emailing a copy to everybody following the webinar. Also, at the end, you will have the opportunity to ask questions through the chat box. If you think of any questions during our presentation, please feel free to type them into the chat box right on Zoom, and we'll answer them at the end. All right, so today we are going to start by defining mindful aging, including how-tos, the stages of aging and retirement, tips on how to start the care conversation with a partner or a parent, how to then manage the caregiving experience once it begins, and a few different care options and how we can help through this process. Just that. Okay, so let's start with mindful aging. What is mindful aging and how do we do it? Now, not to point anything out directly, but I think Derek is likely the better person to explain this for us. So Derek, please take it away.
Oh, that hurts. That hurts. But I'm trying to age gracefully. So yes, I am a little bit more mindful of the aging process, being somewhat older than Chelsea and her family. I have grandchildren older than her children, so gives you some idea. But aging is a natural process. We all go through different ages and stages, and it's essential that we approach it with just an awareness. We have to accept that we are getting older. Things will change as we go along. There's some great benefits. I now get discounts for being of a certain age when I go to certain stores and on certain days. It's wonderful. But it does help to be planning ahead when we look at it. As you age and get into retirement, you have the opportunity, or most people have the opportunity, they're not working or not working as much, so they have time to develop deeper connections, spend more time with family and friends, hobbies, things that are important to them and that they enjoy. But it does take some time to plan and prepare for those things ahead of time. So we're going to look at sort of what we call the 3 stages of aging and retirement. First stage, which we've seen with a lot of clients, is what we call active retirement. When we're doing financial projections, we often run a scenario with extra spending for travel and bucket list items, things that they wanted to do and we're waiting for retirement. So the first 5 or 10 years, they're quite active, traveling to different places, doing things, building things, just taking advantage of the newfound freedom of time and being able to do what they want, the freedom to do that. We do find that people, it's different for everybody, whether that's 3 years or 5 years or 10 years down the road. We go into what we call peaceful retirement, which is they're not quite so eager to spend 3 hours at the airport getting ready to board a flight for somewhere, or they say, oh, cost of travel insurance is a little expensive, maybe I'll stay in Canada, and so on. So they spend more time just developing their hobbies, close relationships, volunteering, and really building on those kind of things. The challenge is that we never know how long these are going to last, each of these stages. And we get into the final stage of aging and retirement, and not everybody hits this stage, but many people do, where there's some kind of capacity concerns, physical capacity or mental capacity. It's one of those things that can happen. It can happen quite unexpectedly. So Let me just share with you a little bit from my perspective and my own experience of these sort of three stages and what might happen. And every situation is different. So I'm one of four children. Mom and dad lived in northern BC, and I grew up there. And after a number of years, I would say after the more active retirement, they were sort of moving to their peaceful retirement. They decided to move to the sunny south, so relocated to that wonderful southern city of Edmonton, Alberta. So for some of us, that's still quite a bit north, but for them, it was an 8-hour drive south. They first moved into just a regular neighborhood in Edmonton. After a number of years there with a big yard and a big garden, which mom and dad loved, they found it was getting a little bit much for them as they grew in age. So they decided the city's getting pretty big and pretty busy. They moved to a little village just about an hour south of Edmonton into a retirement community, and was one where they sort of like Wilmot Creek. If any of you have been out there, you buy your property and then you still have monthly expenses. Their particular setup was that they had quad units. There was a fourplex, 2 units on the bottom, 2 units on the top, one main entrance into it, and you shared the storage room down below, or each of you had a quarter of the basement as a storage room. And there was a clubhouse and lots of activities, and it was a real nice community. They got to know people, and that was wonderful. And then this was, I guess it would be about 20 years ago now. Juan and I were in a movie. I didn't even have a cell phone, but she did. And we came out of the movie and there was a message on the phone. Your dad had a stroke. And so we madly tried to figure out what was going on. And he'd had a stroke. He was in hospital in Edmonton, was completely paralyzed on the left side. Fortunately, he had a miraculous recovery and was able to get around with a walker, and even after a little bit more therapy, with a cane for short distances and a walker for long distances. So they continued to stay where they were in Wetaskiwin in the retirement community. And a few years went by. As I said, we're a family of 4. So I had 2 sisters living in Edmonton, which was, again, 45 minutes to an hour drive for them to get to visit mom and dad. They still visited them regularly. And I've got a sister that lives in northern Alberta, so it's a 5-hour drive for her to get to Edmonton, a 4-hour flight for me, plus the waiting and traveling back and forth. So the 2 sisters there started to help with medical appointments and so on as dad's health started to fail. Being the only boy, I was sometimes given the task of having hard conversations. And it got to the point where mom was getting quite worn out after a number of years after dad had his stroke. And so even though the girls had tried to bring up the discussion of moving to a retirement home as opposed to the community where there were more services available, dad would have nothing to do with it. So I was trying to be a little bit tricky and arranged a viewing of one of the retirement homes in Wetaskiwin, the village they were in. But when we got there, dad wouldn't get out of the vehicle. So mom and I, and my wife Wanda was with me, we went in and we toured through. Ultimately, we ended up convincing dad that that would be a good thing for him to do. And the first thing I remember mom saying is, "Phew, there's 21 more meals a week that I don't have to plan for or shop for." And ultimately, they were in a situation where they had their own kitchenette and they could choose how many meals a week that they wanted to go down to. And they ended up settling into a rhythm of usually going down for a couple of meals a day, except for the weekends, they would eat out or cook themselves. And so that worked well for a while. But as dad aged and his physical condition continued to deteriorate a little bit, more hospital visits, more doctor visits, it was becoming a little bit taxing on my 2 sisters, because for them it was a 2-hour round trip to go to the doctor or the hospital with them to make sure that they understood what was going on and advocate for them. So again, a few years later, it was my task to convince them to move into Edmonton so that they'd be within 5 minutes or 10 minutes of my 2 sisters. And that one was a little bit easier. And so we did get them moved into Edmonton, and that worked well for the first little bit. Mom had to go in for surgery for breast cancer. And so we thought, well, this would be a great opportunity. She needs a bit of respite. And so there was some therapy that was available at a rehab clinic. And we thought, oh, it'd be a wonderful idea. We'll take him down there for a couple of weeks. They can do some rehab. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks. Mom will be well rested when he comes home. And they said, oh, are you sure you want us to have him assessed? And us being a little bit new to this game, we said, sure, we want him assessed. We want to know how he's doing. Uh, that was our first mistake, maybe. But when we came back at the end of the rehab and sat down with the family meeting, they gave us the assessment. They said, well, family, your father, on his best days, he can actually get up and go to the washroom himself with the aid of his cane or walker or wheelchair or bars, you know. So he's pretty good on his best days. However, on his worst days, it takes 2 nurses to help him toilet or really get him dressed and so on. Therefore, he cannot go back to the retirement home you're in because it's a retirement home and doesn't have the facilities and the care required. He has to go to a long-term care home. That was a bit of a shock for us. And Dad was quite curious, actually. He says, why can't I go back to my own place? I'm paying for that and I can go there. And I said, Dad, well, actually you can, but you have to sign a waiver that basically says that you are going to provide 24/7 care out of your own pocket for somebody to come and look after you and make sure that you're attended for. I said, these are the rules. So that moved us into a long-term care situation. And Mom went back to the retirement home. They moved from a 2-bedroom to a 1-bedroom, or she moved to a 1-bedroom from that to reduce costs a little bit. But Dad ended up in a long-term care home for about 9 months and then passed away. Mom is still in that retirement home. And so, again, my 2 sisters that live in Edmonton have done a tremendous job of looking after them, but it didn't come without some sacrifices on their part. They were both working. They had sometimes had to take time off work. They had to forego activities that they had planned in order to be there for Mom and Dad. And of course, my sister from Northern Alberta would come down and visit them regularly. And I would fly out once or twice a year and visit them, talk to them on the phone. But that's what happened in our situation. Can you imagine what would have happened if I would have been the only child? Would have been a whole different story. So we didn't really do it. We learned on the fly. So we're going to talk, Chelsea's going to talk about how to set up that the conversation to get things started.
Yeah. Thanks for your story. It really helps put things into perspective, and you really experienced full circle the different stages of aging and retirement with your parents, and especially in the incapacity phase the last many years. I know no one likes to think about these things, always hoping that it won't happen to them or their parents. But as we just heard, it is reality and something that we need to be prepared for. So let's get into how to start the care conversation. Having the conversation is important, but there are keys to remember. So, as we know, most people want to be in control of the decisions regarding their life. For parents, it is usually very hard to accept that their children should be making decisions on their behalf, especially once there are capacity concerns in play. And you should never assume that they haven't thought about their plans for their elder years. So to us, we think the best time to start the care conversation is during the peaceful retirement phase. Your parents have had their fun. Now it's time to think about the future and their wishes. So to start the care conversation, simply come to your family and say, I want to be aware of your wishes for your lifestyle as you age. If something were to happen suddenly, I don't want any of us to be forced to make decisions on your behalf that do not reflect your wishes. So with this approach, you're being respectful and displaying interest in their well-being while also keeping them in control of their decisions.
Just one funny story about that, Chelsea, is again, people think differently. One tough conversation I had with Dad was he hadn't been driving for a number of years because of using his walker and so on, but he was bound and determined his license was up for renewal. He was going to get licensed. I'm going like, Dad, what do you need a license for? I said, you're in a walker. You haven't driven for 3 years. Why do you need to renew your license? And of course, he's a World War II vet. He's always thinking about protecting and so on. I mean, part of it was the pride of you're losing that one piece of dignity of being able to drive yourself. He says, well, if there was ever an emergency, then I could get behind the wheel and drive. I could get myself into the vehicle. And I said, well, so you know what? I said, if it was an emergency, I'm pretty sure the police would be understanding. And if they wouldn't be, I'll pay the ticket. And he sort of smiled and he gave up his driver's license. We didn't bother going through with it, but you have to understand where they're coming from. So have some patience with them and think about all the things that they've done in their lives and how they supported you when you were younger.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good note. So continuing on with the care conversation, while having the conversation earlier rather than later is helpful for your parents, it's also helpful for you as you'll be better prepared and able to plan for the future, especially if there's a crisis. So just some points here. Understand how caregiving can affect you. Be realistic and know your resources. What are you prepared to do and not prepared to do? Note your own preferences and plan for your own future as well. Being a caregiver can be challenging, but you don't have to do it alone. So building a caregiving support team and asking what support role each person is willing to play is important. Next, understand your role in supporting the person's needs and wishes. So have an open and honest discussion. Start the conversations by sharing how you feel and why you think discussions are important. Also ask your parents how they feel about their situation in the future. And it's also important to know your parents' values and wishes. So what do they want today? What do they want in the future? Write their wishes down. And there's also legal documents to support these types of things. Like you've likely heard of wills and powers of attorney. So this is a good place where your parents can put their values and wishes on a legal document. And lastly, understand your role in their healthcare. So you can pre-plan by researching costs associated with care options, which we're going to talk about later on today. Assess your parents' financial resources available for treatments, living arrangements, and other care expenses. It's also important to know about their health condition. You can do this by asking the healthcare team questions and get clear answers about your parents' health condition, how the illness will progress, and what physical and behavioral challenges you can expect. Okay, so now we've had the care conversation with our parents, and they're entering the stage of reduced capacity. You're in the thick of it. Now we will discuss how the care experience can impact you and how to manage it. Derek, please
Alrighty.
take us away.
Okay. So here's a number of things that can impact you or your family, again, depending how many of there are. As I mentioned, in our situation, there were 4 of us, but really only 2 that were close by and responsible for the majority of the care. It still affected me psychologically, emotionally, wanting to be there and help more. Sometimes people spend so much time. Just imagine if there had been only one person involved and that person was an hour or 2 away. And we know people in situations like this. Poor health habits because you're losing sleep, you're not eating because you're just grabbing something on the go. Do you have to reduce your work hours so that you can do this? Do you need to take extra time off? Are you forced into early retirement? In some cases, we've come across people where they've had to help their parents pay for some of the things. Our family got along well, but there are families we've seen where there's quite a significant conflict from one sibling to another. And, is there adequate support around? So as we move into that, what are the expectations and obligations of the family? So everyone has a different role. And that's easy to say from the outside. When you're in it, it's a little bit different. As I mentioned, there's 4 of us. 2 of my sisters were basically the primary caregivers. My role primarily was to help with the financial part of it. That's sort of my area of expertise, and I can do that from a distance. And when I visited, but the day-to-day care was mainly taken care of by my 2 sisters living in the city. And we're wonderful at that because we have some geographical limitations. Again, as I said, I'm a 4-hour flight and my other sister is a 5-hour drive away. We can't be going there on a daily or not necessarily even a weekly basis. And we have to focus on the immediate family. Fortunately for us and our family, all of the spouses of the siblings get along well. But if one of your sibling spouses either feels left out or is ostracized by some other members of your family, then none of the spouses should be involved. It should be either an all or nothing. And you have to look at what other things might be there other than just advocating at medical appointments and so on. Was there a business that they were running that somebody needs to step in and take over? And have to understand the different makeup of individuals. Most of us didn't have any problem changing diapers for our kids. It might be a lot harder for some of us to, if it came to that, to have to change diapers for our parents. It's hard emotionally on some people can't do it. So hopefully it never gets to that, but there are situations where that happens. So understand the personality of each person, how you can share the load, shopping for supplies, making sure their prescriptions are filled out if they're on medications, making sure they're taking them regularly. Do you need to shop for them? Do they need some social time other than just you visiting them? Are there other activities they can be involved in, either in their community or if they're in a retirement home or wherever? So that's the big thing, is to who's on your team. They may have younger siblings or good friends that are willing to step up and help as well. So widen the net. Many hands make light work, and do as much as you can in that regard. So then we move into how to manage that caregiving experiences. Identify all the resources available to you. As I mentioned, we were a little bit caught off guard. I mean, we knew some of the things, but certainly not all of them. And there is a wealth of information for caring from the aging, and we'll go through some of those resources at the end, and we'll have it available if anybody wants a copy of it. But unfortunately, there's not one place that sort of lines everything up and says, go here, go here, go here. Is it dementia? Is it a physical disability? Do you need in-house care? What kind of helps do you need? There's so many different organizations, and unfortunately, most of them aren't intertwined, and there's not one spot that you can go to get a list of everything. So it takes some time. Start working early. Learn how to advocate for your parents and go to hospitals, to doctor's appointments and so on. To the best of my knowledge, my sisters haven't been keeping a journal, although we're in regular contact. We sort of know what's going on. You have to know your own limits. And again, my limit and my one sister in Northern Alberta, our limits are that we're geographically distanced. We can't be there every day. We can get on the phone, we can call, but we can't be there physically. So that's up to my other two sisters. And, during some of the stages, they were both working full time, had families of their own to look after, had activities of their own. So you've got to be prepared. Sort of the last 3 points here. Ask for help. There's all sorts of people going through this. You're not alone. We're not the only ones that went through this. So as you come across people literally at the doctor's office, in the retirement homes or wherever, talk to others about what their journey is. Maybe they've found a help that you weren't aware of. And you have to take care of yourself physically and emotionally. As they say, when you get on the airplane, in case the oxygen mask comes down, put it on yourself first and then help somebody else. If you're dead, you can't help anybody else. So you have to take care of yourself. That's very important.
Okay. Thanks, Derek. So that covers off the care conversation and kind of managing the whole experience itself. Let's switch over now to some of the different care options that are available. While most Canadians do want to stay in their homes as they age, they may not have it set up to allow for the mobility issues that could come with aging. They may eventually require caregivers to come in to assist with meals, bathing, housework, medications, helping them dress, shopping, managing finances, and so on. Often without a plan in place, some or all of these duties will fall to one or more of the children, which presents its own series of challenges, as Derek shared. So here are some of the options as your parents progress. As mentioned earlier, aging independently at home is the most ideal for your parents and likely what they will prefer. However, there may come a time when they require additional care. So they can arrange care at home, either by family members or care professionals. The next step is a retirement home or assisted living, where there is still some independence, but care is available as needed. Once you're deemed unfit to care for yourself, as what Derek's dad experienced near the end, there are long-term care facilities or nursing homes. And lastly, we've all heard of palliative care or end-of-life care, which typically doesn't last too long near the end. So those are the options. Now let's look at some of the estimates for what they can cost. Now, we want to emphasize the word estimate. So we all know costs can vary significantly depending on the level of care that is needed and also the level of care or care options that are desired. The costs we'll be reviewing today are for single occupancy, so for one person. And while double occupancy typically doesn't result in double the cost because you're still in the same room, it is of course a higher cost for a couple. So just keep those things in mind while we're looking at the next few slides. So first we have retirement homes. For a basic home, costs can range from $2,000 to $4,250 a month. And in Ontario, so the $2,042.50 is Canada-wide. And in Ontario specifically, the average retirement home cost is about $3,400 a month. As I mentioned earlier, retirement homes still give you the independence you desire while having some of the features of a long-term care facility, such as potentially a doctor or nurse on site. If you would rather still own your retirement home versus renting, there are also resort-style 55-plus communities you've likely heard about. They're typically bungalows and can be found across the province that you can actually buy versus rent. Some of these are priced as low as $250,000, $300,000, depending where you're looking at. But we know in Newcastle, there's a place called Wilmot Creek. They can start around $500,000 and even go up to $1 million. So there's lots of different options depending what you're looking for and how much you can afford. Okay, so once you start requiring additional care on a consistent basis, there is assisted living, which can cost on average of $3,200 a month. You still maintain some independence, but have help for some of your day-to-day activities, such as cooking, bathing, medication management. Having this type of care can alleviate some pressure from your children or other close family members. There are also options like a group home, which is typically more quaint and private, can have up to 15 residents in one group home. In these scenarios, you have more personalized service with a more home-like community feeling. Room and board for these types of homes can range from $1,500 to $5,000 a month, depending on the room type, options you select, and government funding. Based on incomes, you can get subsidies, so definitely some things to keep in mind for consideration. Excuse me. Lastly, just a couple other options here. Alzheimer's care and memory care for dementia patients is one of the most costly types of care. Inevitably, many sufferers of dementia will be admitted into long-term care, but there are waiting lists to get into these homes. So for the memory care facilities, they can cost upwards of $6,400 a month. Long-term care costs are generally covered by the government across Canada. If you can get into a long-term care home, care costs are covered, but you'll only need to pay for room and board. And we'll look into, there are maxes to long-term care costs, and we'll look into those a little bit later on as well. Lastly, if you're still living in your home but are requiring some care, you can expect an hourly cost of anywhere from $23 to $70 an hour. All right. Derek, why don't you just go into long-term care wait lists specifically?
All right, so long-term care. So this is for somebody that needs assistance, as we found out with my father, is he was not allowed to go back to his retirement home after he was assessed. Once we understood what an assessment was, I think it's the same in Ontario, but in Alberta, because that's where they were at the time, we were said, there's an opening at this long-term care facility here. We're putting them there because that's the only place open, which wasn't that convenient for us. It was downtown Edmonton. And we were given, I said, you can choose up to 3 locations. And whichever one comes up first, that's where you're going. Or you can choose to stay where you are until one of your higher one comes up. This is, but don't count on that because it could be quite a while. So Dad only spent a few days in that one long-term care home, got into one of the ones that we'd chosen, which was a little more convenient for us physically, and also had regular retirement rooms there, because then Mom would be able to move in and be in the same complex as he would. And that's, so she got moved up to the top of the waiting list, although he passed away 9 months later, and she still hadn't been called in. In Ontario, the wait list average for long-term care is 201 days. And again, I'm not sure on this, but I would say that's to get you in anywhere. If you're wanting to choose for a specific location, then you might have to wait longer than that. Because the way it worked in Edmonton, when we were there, if we didn't choose, say, here's where we're going to want to go, they could have literally put us an hour's drive out of Edmonton because there was a bed available. And so you need to be cognizant of that. And then with people, it goes down the list. You go farther and farther down the list as you have people that need care but aren't quite as urgent. And this is for long-term care. Now, if you're looking for retirement homes, just to go in and, as my mom and dad did sort of that first stage, went into a place that had the option to buy meals or to cook your own and activities and all those sort of things. We know of some of the retirement homes around here in Oshawa are 1.5 to 2 year waits. So if you're thinking that you might want to, quote, downsize and move into one of these apartment style retirement homes, we would really recommend that you go start checking them out now. Because if you feel that you're going to be ready in 1 or 2 years and you go looking then, you might have to wait another 1 or 2 years to get in. So go look around, start doing some early shopping, and if you find something you like, put your name on the waiting list. Worst thing that happens is 9 months or a year from now, 1.5 years, they say, oh, you're at the top of the list, you want a place. You can say, no, I'm not ready for this yet. But if you say, well, I'm getting pretty close to ready. Yeah, I think I'm ready for this. Otherwise, you're going to be at that bottom of that list and be another 1.5 or 2 years after you thought you were going to move into a retirement home. Or you'll have to choose something that wasn't your first choice, but it was something that was available sooner. So, but let's now talk about, again, those options for you that are still able to look after yourselves and maybe just don't want to, do you want to stay in your home or do you want to move to a retirement home? So there's benefits of both. And so let's go over some of the benefits of staying in your own home. I mean, you live there, again, for many people, they've lived there 20, 30, 40 years. It's a lifetime of memories and just comfort and familiarity, gives you peace of mind. You've got independence and autonomy. Even if you aren't able to drive so much or whatever, you still got the neighbors around that you know, and you can go around, you can come and go as you please. You've got the emotional and social connections with the neighborhood. And it's pretty cost effective. If you've got your home paid for, you still have heat, hydro, taxes, and all those kind of things. Plus, you might be getting to the stage where you're paying somebody for shoveling the driveway or mowing the lawn and other things. And if you want a little bit of extra care or need a little bit of extra care, you can personalize that and have somebody come and check you out once in a while or bring in some meals once in a while. So there's a lot of benefits to staying in your own home. And one of them, from a financial standpoint, it's a tax-free investment. So if it continues to go up in value, whenever you sell it, it's still tax-free as your principal residence. Government has floated trial balloons about taxing your principal residence. but every time they've been so bombarded that they just quickly take it away. So at least for now, we're safe. As long as you have your home and it continues to increase in value, that's your little nest egg that you can have to sell completely free of taxes at a later point in time. And there's some benefits to living in a retirement home, as the picture here indicates, which is a fact. The average woman lives a lot longer than the average man, so hopefully there's a few men in this retirement residence, but these ladies here are showing you that the vast numbers are the other way. For them or for anybody that's on their own or even just starting to fail physically or becoming a little unsure of themselves, there's safety and security. There's somebody there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's maintenance-free living. They don't have to worry about calling somebody to shovel the driveway. Don't have to worry about the roof being blown off or anything like that. There's social opportunities. They don't have to go out in a snowstorm to get to the seniors club. They've got a clubhouse right there on site in most of these places. They've got activities literally every day of the week. There is access to care and support there. Many of them have amenities such as hairdressers. They have doctors that either are on site or come and make a regular visit there. Some have pool tables, swimming pools. Again, the amount of variation is quite incredible, from very basic retirement homes to retirement homes that have sort of like staying at a 5-star resort. And of course, you pay accordingly. So that's sort of the general benefits of staying in home or moving to a retirement home. It really is a personal decision. Again, a lot of people love to stay in their own homes, but if it becomes physically challenging, if it becomes, you're not able to get out that much, then moving into a retirement home gives you the benefit for all these social opportunities, make new friends, be involved in activities without ever having to worry about what the weather's like outside or who's going to drive you, because these activities are taken care of in there. So Chelsea's going to run through some estimated average costs. Everybody will be different. Some people live in a large home, some people live in a small home. And the same thing with retirement homes. Some have very basic facilities and others have very extensive facilities.
I don't know about you, but a retirement home sounds pretty good to me. A lot less stress in my life. Okay, so let's look at some of the cost comparisons between the two. Again, this is based on single occupancy, so just one person. So on the left, we'll look at some of the costs associated with home ownership. So as we know, we all pay property taxes if we own a house, just estimating an annual average of $6,000 a year. These are annual costs, keep in mind. For heat, hydro, and water, we're estimating maybe about $7,000 a year, if not more or less. Repairs, so as Derek mentioned, you might have to replace your roof every few years or, repaint or something like that. Water leak, never know what could happen with home ownership. Keeping your house updated or just general upkeep, like paying someone to shovel the snow or mow your lawn. Or keeping updates ready, updating your bathroom every now and then. Again, they don't happen every year, but on average could cost around $8,000 to $10,000 a year. Your annual food grocery bill could be about $7,000 a year. Likely a little conservative based on the food prices these days, but eating out, going to restaurants, things like that. And then any kind of extracurricular activities or traveling. Maybe you have a gym membership, maybe you're out playing pickleball 5 days a week. It can add up. So maybe $10,000 a year towards that. So if we total all those up at the end, we're looking at about $48,000 for the year or $4,000 a month. You can get a retirement home at that cost, though likely a little bit more expensive if you want to have all the extra bells and whistles. So if we compare that to $60,000 a year at a retirement home or $5,000 a month, really isn't that much more each month, and you would have the proceeds of your house that would help fund those extra costs. And that's actually something that we run for our clients for the last several years that we've found really helpful to provide peace of mind, because it is likely that you're eventually going to have to either have some care in your home or want to move into a retirement home so you don't have that stress anymore of home ownership or having to look after yourself. So we run these scenarios reviewing their current plan of staying in their home versus having to sell their home and move into a retirement home. So investing the net proceeds from your house sale and living off of those for the next, 10, 15, 20 years in a retirement home. And in more cases than none, the success rate still remains very strong because we know house prices are quite high these days. If you sell that, it is a large chunk of your net worth that you're then living off of for the next 10 years or more. So that's something that we've found very helpful in our meetings lately. Now, we hope that kind of covers off, benefits of home ownership versus retirement. Now let's just kind of sum it all up and focus on what is important. Derek, can you explain that for us?
Yeah, I mean, really, this is something we should be living on all through our lives. There's a lot of things that we can't control, so there's no point in wasting time on things that are totally out of our control. We can't control the stock market. We can't control the weather. There's a lot of things we can't control. So we need to focus on what is it that we can control. We also need to focus on what's important. So what's important to us as caregivers? What's important to, if it's our parents, if they're the ones willing, what's important to them? What's important to us? And what can we control to that? If they want more social activities, for example, well, we can control how much time we spend with them. We can also try to arrange for them, again, depending if they're in a retirement home or if they're living on their own, to have them join some clubs and so on. But let's focus on the things that are really important and forget about it. We don't have enough time, especially when you get into a caregiving situation. You don't have enough time to live your life and live somebody else's life. So focus on the things that are really, really important. And, we've helped a lot of people in that regard, which leads us into our next slide, is how can we help? Well, again, we provide this kind of conversation starters to our clients as they're going through the aging and the retirement process. We're also talking to some of the younger people, or they're bringing it up because they're now being put into that situation. We've had a number of cases where we've set up family meetings where our clients that are now aging saying, look, my memory's not getting as good. I'm not as comfortable with my finances as I was before. We want you to meet our children so they know who you are and you know who they are and you know what you're doing. They know what you're doing with our money and how you're structuring things. We've got a great tool that we can send out afterwards. If anybody's interested, it's called an estate check list. Just for collecting information. It goes through a whole bunch of things to see if you've either thought about those things or if they're already in place. We ask people to see their wills and their powers of attorney. So we know that because roughly 50% of Canadians don't have a will. That's horrible. And if they don't have a will, they most likely don't have powers of attorney either. So we're not lawyers, we can't do that, but we've been through the good and the bad and the ugly on behalf of our clients through all sorts of power of attorney struggles or issues and estate issues. So we can point out some perhaps troublesome areas if we can see your documents. And then we can make some recommendations. Go see your lawyer, and here's some things that you likely want to get updated. And we're here to answer questions. We don't know everything, but we have lots of resources available to us. And after 35 plus years in the business, we've seen just about every situation that's popped up or something very similar. So we're here to help. And Chelsea's going to wrap up with one very common thing that happens and we're a little bit leery of.
Yeah, so considering a joint bank account, especially as people are aging, they like to add on a child to their bank account just in case something happens. They can help them pay their bills. They don't have to worry about, oh, didn't add my power of attorney in time. So this kind of alleviates that kind of stress for some aging parents. So we're just going to look at some advantages and disadvantages. Advantages, of course, as I mentioned, ensuring their bills are paid on time. They can pay for their caregiving expenses. The children have access to the funds when they pass away. So it would just roll right into the kid's name or the child's name. And they can also monitor the account to make sure they aren't victims of fraud. We know that happens a lot these days. And some disadvantages is anyone on the account can withdraw money or close the account. So you definitely want to make sure that whoever you're adding on to the account, you trust wholly. And also, there's also some legal implications that could arise in the event of a bankruptcy. The account would be considered an asset, so would be used to resolve the bankruptcy if needed. Also, if your child divorces or has any kind of marital issues, the account would also be considered an asset. You could lose half of the account to that spouse that your child is divorcing. So just some things to keep in mind. Also, I'm not sure, you might have heard earlier this year, things around a bare trust and some kind of tax implications around that. So as long as these bank accounts are under $50,000, there's no concerns regarding this new tax filing requirement for bare trusts. But if the account is over 50,000, or if you're adding a joint owner on an investment account that's over 50,000, or even adding your child's name on title to your house, these are considered a bare trust and you could be required to file an annual tax return in future years. So just things to keep in mind. Always look at the pros and cons of each thing. Seek legal or advice from a financial advisor before you make any of these changes, so you know and are aware of the implications for each. Anything do you want to add to that, Derek?
Just the only thing I would add is, again, we've been very strong promoters of as people age and as they're feeling less comfortable with their finances and handling them, or maybe not able to physically do some of the things, add a child or a number of children onto a bank account, but make sure it's no more than about $20,000 to $25,000, so that we don't have to worry about any trust return filings in the future. And if anything happens, all the disadvantages are very minimal because it's a small amount of money. Still takes advantage of all the benefits of having that joint account, because they can take care of paying bills and so on. And most people don't have more than $25,000 a month in bills outstanding. So that's plenty to keep in that kind of an account. So as we mentioned, I'm not going to go through each of these, but there's just all sorts. We've got 3 pages of resources, which we can send out as a PDF to people if they want them. But everything from tax things to, this is actually kind of a fun one. You can go in and how long will you live, or the diet one. So I went in and I just kept adding a scoop of ice cream each day till I saw my life expectancy start to go down. So I know how much ice cream I can eat and not affect my life expectancy. But you can have all sorts of fun with it. And that sort of brings us to the end of the presentation. Hopefully it's brought some new information to you. Again, we've just hit the tip of the iceberg and given you, again, a lot of general information. So we're available to answer more specific questions. And I know we've got at least a couple of questions that were sent in previous. And if there's any more that have come in, we'll address them. So Chelsea.
Yeah, so now is the perfect time to enter any questions that you thought of into the chat function. So if you're just on your Zoom screen, there should be a chat that you can click at the bottom, or you might have to click the more options, but type in any questions that you have there and we'll get to them now. Just want to make a note here, we are on social media, so we provide twice a week financial literacy tips. So feel free to give us a follow on any of those pages. And we did get some pre-submitted questions when people registered. They put in some questions in the question box. So we have one that's asking, I have a 99-year-old mother in assisted living. If she needs full-time care in the future, it could cost a significant amount each month. How do we protect her financially? And can the government or the institution seize her assets to pay for care? So this is a great question, and we put together a slide on it. We mentioned earlier that there is a cap for long-term care costs. So you can see the cap here on the right-hand side, depending on what type of accommodation you want, basic, semi-private, private. And there's also reductions you can apply for, but it is income tested. Derek, want to add on that as well?
Yeah, so just 2 things. So this is for long-term care. They're now in a long-term care facility. It's not a retirement home. So when Dad went into the long-term care, we paid, it was roughly close to $2,000 a month for the long-term care, but mom still had to pay the almost $3,000 for her retirement home. So they went from like $3,000 a month to $5,000 a month very, very quickly. The other thing that happens is, as we've had other clients experience this, as their loved one went into long-term care, the only available spot was a long stay private, which, as you can see in the example here, is almost $1,000 more than the long-term basic. So we have had a few clients where they've gone through, okay, they started out because they needed a long-term care home. They went in and they had to pay $2,800 a month. Then as a semi-private room became available, they moved them down to semi-private and they saved themselves a few $100s a month. And then finally, months later, when a long stay basic came available, they were able to move down and reduce their expenses by almost $1,000. The long-term care costs are income tested, not asset tested. So you could have $2 million in investments, and long-term care can't do anything about that. All they can do is take all the income you have from CPP, old age security, or whatever form of income you have. They cannot go for more than that. And as you see in the slide, if your income is quite low, you can actually get some reduction in that rate as well, but that's only for the basic, not if you're wanting to be in private. The other side of it is if you're in a private retirement home, I don't know 100% the answer, but I'm thinking it's like any other landlord and tenant. They can't force you to sell your assets, but if you're not paying the rent, they can say, well, you haven't paid rent for 3 months, so we're going to give you an eviction notice. I think that's how it works. That's on the retirement home. If they're in some kind of long-term care that they've got to get all that extended care, that's a different story. So again, what is the situation? You have to look into that and find out that, but anything where the government is providing some assistance, like long-term care, the doctor says they've got to go into long-term care, retirement home isn't good enough anymore. It's just based on income, never mind the assets.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. We've received another question in here. So they're asking if there are any tax write-offs for long-term care costs. And these actually do count as medical expenses. So you can include them as a medical expense on your tax return. Derek, you want to add anything to that?
So often by the time a person is ready to go into long-term care, they have already qualified for or you have to make an application, but they would qualify for what's called the disability tax credit. And so a doctor has to sign a form saying, yes, this person has a disability. And it doesn't give you a tax refund, but it gives you an extra $8,000 or $9,000 worth of credits. So it saves you some income tax owing. And it can go back. If somebody came in today and said, oh, I've been having memory problems for a couple of years, if the doctor has that documented back to 2018 and signs the form and CRA approves it, they'll actually give you that credit back to when the diagnosis was first given. The other thing is there are certain costs with long-term care homes and so on. They divide them out. They usually provide quite a good statement. Most care homes do. My understanding is that you can only claim the disability tax credit or the medical expenses, whichever is greater. Or in some cases, we've got a couple of clients where they have a lot of extra medical care. You can claim a certain amount and then a bit of the extra as well. So yes, a long-winded answer to say yes, there are some tax benefits for any kind of medical expenses, whether it's through the disability tax credit or just the costs that would be used as part of your medical expenses.
Yeah, that's a great question. And then we had another question just asking on whether things vary at all if you're in Northern Ontario or Toronto, and there are different, tax implications depending where you are. Obviously, costs vary a lot depending on where you're looking to live. Toronto, of course, would be likely the most expensive in Ontario, and then Northern Ontario might be a little bit less expensive. But Derek, you want to add on that as well?
Yeah, there are certain, and I don't know the exact areas, but there are, for most provinces, if you live in what they call remote areas, they have a special tax allowance just on regular income tax. There are also, in some cases, regional benefits as well that can kick in to help maybe with some of the housing costs. But you'd have to check in with your own region on that. And as Chelsea mentioned, one of the biggest differences we notice is that as you move farther from the GTA, the cost of the retirement homes typically goes down. Long-term care facility doesn't really change that much because they're really just charging for the room and board type of part of it. They're not charging for the actual care.
Mhm. Yeah. All right, so that's all the questions. Whoops. Where did my screen go? Sorry, my screen went away, but that was all the questions for today. So thank you for listening. And again, there is going to be a replay. So we've recorded this webinar. There will be a replay that we'll send out via email to everybody. And if there's any questions that come up after the webinar, feel free to send us an email. Or if you have any family or friends that are going through this current scenario with their parents or a partner, feel free to pass them our way, and we can help them out as well. So again, thanks again for listening in, and we hope to talk to you soon. Oh, Derek, you want to add something?
Just the last thing is that if you wanted to see any of those resources that we had, those few slides, just let us know. We can send that out via email, via PDF. And also we have what's called a tool called the estate tax or the estate checklist, which just is a whole list of things you can go through, or your parents can go through. Again, depends who's looking at it, and just see, have they done these things? Some of the things won't apply, like if they don't own a business, they don't have to worry about that. But it goes through and just gives you quite a thorough list of all the things that you should be looking out for as you're preparing for what might happen in the future. We can also send that out as a PDF as well. So we just need to know that you're interested in that, and we'll send it out to you. So thanks very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and have yourself a wonderful day. Bye for now.
Take care.